right, guys. So we are going to start the hair unit. So this will be the hair unit in our notes. We also go into fiber at the end of this. So we'll just be doing hair this next week and a half, something like that. All right. So human hair is one of the most frequently found pieces of evidence. So is fiber. So those are they go together in that way. In that way is kind of why I put them in the same unit. They're very frequently found at crime scenes, mostly because it's so easy for us to lose hair. And it's so easy for us to lose fibers. Like they just come off really easily. So unfortunately, hair is not the best type of physical evidence, though, for establishing identity. So if you thought that you can, I've read some people saying that like, oh, they can get DNA from their hair. You can't actually, or almost always. You can't get DNA from your hair. If they rip out their hair, and there was a follicle on the end of it, like had skin tissue from the follicle being ripped out, then that you might be able to get enough to get DNA out of. And every now and then they can get this very specific kind of DNA. It's called mitochondrial DNA, which just links back to your mom. It's not your entire DNA from hair, but usually you can't. Usually you can't get identity from hair. So all we can say is, so I can't say that the hair actually belongs to that person. Like I can't be for sure. But I can say that I can rule out suspects, like if it's not the right color, if it's not the right length, if they have dyes in their hair and the suspect doesn't have dyes in their hair. So like you can rule out certain suspects and you can say, oh, they have a 70% surety of matching hair. But you can't be like, I'm 100%, because you can't be 100% hardly ever with hair. The average human has approximately 250,000 hairs on their body, so whole body, that get replaced in a 3-year cycle. So about every 3 years, you have like a whole new set of hair. About 250 hairs are shed daily, actually, with about 100 of them coming from your head. So I feel like boys wouldn't notice as much if you have shorter hair, but for girls, I'm sure like you have noticed, we lose a lot of hair. I'm losing hair all the time. I just pulled out several strands right now. And I feel like a lot of times we're like, oh, this is bad. This is like, but it's actually super normal for you to lose about 100 hairs a day. So from your head. And then we have hairs all over our bodies that we're shedding as well. So when you're at a crime scene, like that's why it's so easy to find hair, because we literally lose them all day, every day. There's hairs everywhere. Blondes tend to have the most hairs, tend to have the most like actual hairs on their head, and redheads tend to have the least. I don't know why, just that's generally what occurs. Hair at a crime scene. Hair is considered class evidence. So remember, individual versus class. Like I said, you can't usually get identity from our hair. There isn't hardly ever DNA in it. So alone hair without the follicle cells, it cannot be used to identify a specific person. So it's just class evidence. Anyone that has this color of hair around this length with this kind of hair dye, then they could be the person. But if you do have a follicle, you might be able to get DNA, which would make it individual evidence. So every now and then hair is individual, but it's almost always class evidence. It is also considered biological because, again, it's from a living source. It's not physical, so it's from a living source. It's biological evidence. And it's almost always circumstantial because, again, people are still getting this wrong. Things are only direct evidence if you directly see it get there. If I'm searching a crime scene after the fact and discovering hairs and collecting them as evidence, well, that I didn't see how the hair got there. That's circumstantial evidence. In the best case, an investigator can identify a group or a class of people who have similar traits who might share a certain type of hair. That's usually the best we can do with hair analysis. So you shouldn't really ever convict someone just on hair, but it can always add to the case. It's a good adder. So hair can easily be left behind at a crime scene. It is also, it's really easy to adhere to clothes, carpets, and many other surfaces can be transferred to other locations. This is called secondary transfer. So another reason why you can't be super trusting of hair is that there's this secondary transfer is so easy to get, especially with animal hair. Like I think any of us who have a dog or a cat that has a lot of hair knows if you just hug them for a minute, you're covered in their hair. So let's say that you pet your dog at morning, you give him a big cuddle and you're covered in his hair, you go to school. Well, now when you sit on the chair, you're not here, you're at home. But when you used to come here and you sit on the chair and you would sit with the hair from your dog on your pants legs and you would leave it on the chair. Then a student comes in second period, sits on the same chair you sat on, picks up the hair that you left behind from the chair and picks it up on their pants. And then they carry it around. So then later, let's say that poor person gets mugged and we are trying to find evidence off of that person and we find that dog hair. Well, that person doesn't even have that dog. That's not even that person's dog hair. It was just secondarily transferred to them because I sat on a seat that you sat on that you put the hair onto. That was a long-winded way of saying all that. But secondary transfer is very easy with hair. We just carry it around with us. We leave it around with us. So just because at a crime scene you find a hair on them, they could have picked it up literally anywhere. So it's more important if you find several fibers, several hairs that are all matching that in their crime scene. And then you're like, okay, that person was actually probably here leaving those hairs or fibers behind. Because of its tough outer coating, hair does not easily decompose. It's actually pretty common to find a whole, like, very decayed skeleton, mummy, whatever have you, and them still have hair. Hair analysis may be helpful to determine the following: the human or animal origin. So it should be pretty easy to tell if it's a human or animal hair. You'll get a chance to see that throughout our labs in the future, but animal hair looks pretty different. The broad racial background. Now, it can't be super specific, and if you are a mixed person, that's going to be hard to match. But if you are a African American or Asian, Native American, Indian, so actual Indian, or what's the other one? Or just Caucasian. So those are the broad categories. So it doesn't get into any more needed smaller categories, just those three broad categories. Body region from which the hair came. The hair from our different regions of our body does look different. You can tell just your eyebrows are much coarser, much thicker, mustache, beard, that's all thicker hair than what's on our head. So you usually can tell what body region it came from. Manner in which the hair was removed. So if it just was removed naturally, it just, kind of fell out like hair does, or was it forcibly removed? Chemical tests can provide a history of the use of drugs, poisons, toxins, even our nutrition deficiencies, things like that are all held in your hair. When the follicle of a hair is present, DNA evidence can be obtained. So if they do have a ripped out and there's skin left on that hair piece, you might be able to get DNA. But again, it's not really from the hair. It's from the skin around the tissue. In humans, body hair is mostly reduced, compared to animals. So we have less hair than most of our animals around us. It does not play as large of a role in temperature regulation as it does in other animals. So most animals have it to regulate their temperature. We have evolved to not really need it as much because we have temperature regulators. When humans are born, they have 5 million hair follicles, only 2% of which are on your head. So if you look at these little babies, there are a lot of hair follicles. We were born with just hair all over us, basically. And this is the largest number of hair follicles a human will ever have. As the human ages, the density of our hair decreases. So this baby soft peach fuzz that's all over babies does stop, and we get less and less hair as we age. The hair shaft is composed of protein keratin. So what your hair is made of is called keratin, which is produced in the skin. Keratin makes hair both strong and flexible. The hair shaft is made up of 3 layers. So you are going to have to be able to identify these 3 layers pretty well and be able to see them in a microscope, that kind of stuff as we move forward. And we're going to talk about them in more detail. There's the cortex, which is in the biggest part, meatiest part, the medulla in the center, and then the cuticle is on the outside of it. I know you've heard of your cuticle in your nail beds. This is a different cuticle. New cuticle word. It's the outside of your hair. So it's what you're touching is the cuticle. So let's talk about it first. So the transparent, so means see-through, outer layer of the hair and protects the hair is the cuticle around it. It is made of scales, actually. So when you can zoom in on a strand of hair, it is actually overlapping scales. That is what your cuticle is made of. A healthy strand would look like this. If you've dyed your hair a lot, it gets really frayed. That's why we call it those split ends at the bottom, because they literally, all the scales start getting split and frayed. Different types of mammals have different types of cuticle scale patterns. So ours is pretty flat like this. This is a human scale pattern, just looks flat down the shaft of the hair. If we're looking at some animal patterns, the thicker the hair, like deers, things like that, are going to have way cooler scale patterns to their hair, making them thicker, coarser, They're going to have different types of hair to be like warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer, that kind of thing. But they have literally different scale patterns that are different shapes. Then there's the cortex. Move me up here. Okay, so the cortex is the middle layer. Okay, so it's like most of the hair is the cortex. The thickest part is the cortex, and it's in the core of the hairs. Okay, so it's like most of the hair is the cortex, and it contains the pigment. So this is where your hair color comes into, the hair pigment color. There are two main types of pigments found in hair. Eumelanin gives the color a brown or black color. So the more eumelanin you have in your hair, the darker your hair is. And then there's pheomelanin, produces the color in blonde or red hair. So if you have lighter hair, you're going to have more of the pheomelanin. Now you can have a mixture. Like I have lots of colors in my hair, so you can certainly have a mixture, but they are literally different shapes. You can have different densities of the pigment, making it darker or lighter. But pheomelanin has these like funkier shapes. Eumelanin is like more rounder shapes. And you can certainly have a mixture of shapes, making all the different variations of hair color that we see. Small sacs of air, see these little black dots, can be found inside that are called cortical foci, are also found in this region, especially closer to the root, and tend to be different sizes and shapes. The cortex provides the hair with strength, elasticity, and determines the texture and the quality of your hair. So all that stuff being found inside your cortex. And then the medulla is in the center. So the very, very center is called the medulla. A central core of the hair, it can be a hollow tube, and you wouldn't be able to see it, be empty, or filled with cells. So actually have cells inside of it. Forensic investigators classify hair into 5 different groups depending on the appearance of the medulla. Oop, went too far. So continuous, meaning it's a continuous line. Like you see a dark line like this. This is continuous, okay? Then you have interrupted, but it's interrupted in a like neat way. They're all the same distance apart. Or it could be fragmented, which is almost the same, except for it's not evenly spaced. Like some of them are long, some of them are short, long and short. That's kind of like this one. These are long, long, and then there's a bigger gap. Solid, so like the whole thing looks like it's a medulla almost. So both the medulla, pigment area filling both medulla and the cortex, so just really thick medulla. And then no separate pigmentation in the medulla, so none. Now, most humans actually don't have a medulla. So that your hair will literally look like this a lot of times under the microscope, especially for us more Caucasian type people, especially more with blondes. I see it's just like a one strip of color. It's not as exciting under the microscope as seeing, especially animals. Animals' hair looks usually a lot more exciting. So a lot of humans have no medulla at all. I definitely have kids who do. We get to look at their hair under the microscope and have a medulla. Feel all special for a day. But a lot of our hair just looks like this. They're just slightly different colors. Native Americans and Asians tend to be, if you have that kind of background racial-wise, you tend to be more likely to have a medulla. Animal hairs show a wide variety of medulla patterns. So again, it's like humans would either be like nothing or like you might have a bit of medulla going on here. But animals might have some really weird looking ones. So like this circle pattern, this weird globby looking pattern, a very thick, straight, continuous line, different types of ovals, even these cute squares. This is like a deer with this like big, thick one that looks like this weird scale pattern. So there's a lot of different ones for different animals, and we'll get to see those as we move through our labs. So again, this is just kind of reviewing you. So if I was thinking about a pencil as an analogy for our hair, the cuticle would be the paint on the outside, really thin layer, just protecting our hair. It's made of scales. Cortex would be the thickest part, the wood, most of the pencil, and then the inner core is called the medulla, would be the lead. Now, there are even more differences in our hair, talking about if it's straight versus curly. So hair can vary in shape, length, diameter, texture, color, a lot of different ways. The cross section, so if I cut a piece of hair and I looked at it, it's like I cut it and I looked at it long ways, like I looked down across into the hair and saw how round it was. The cross section hair may be circular, triangular, irregularly shaped, or flattened, influencing the curl of your hair. So people who have really curly hair tend to have a much flatter cross section like this. So like you see this it's way flatter, and this person is a super round hair. The rounder your hair is in the cross section, the more straight your hair will be. The flatter your hair is, the more curly your hair will be. So just you having that flatter makes it curl up on itself. In general, if the closer to an Asian ancestry you have or Native American, you're going to have a more rounder shaped hair. They tend to have very straight hair. Caucasian tends to be in between. So it's like not so round, but definitely not flat either. So in between. And then usually African hair is much more flattened, which is why they have the very, very curly hair. So differences in hair can be used for identification, association, or exclusion. So again, we usually can't say that like this is definitely their hair, but we can exclude people who don't match. So hairs who could have common origin. I'm looking at these two hairs on a microscope and I'm like, yeah, they look very similar. I could say that they are the same thickness, they have the same amount of pigment, they have the same medulla pattern. Okay, they could be the same person. But then these, their pigment is totally different, way more pigment in this one, way less pigment. This one is a thicker hair entirely. So in looking at that, you're like, probably not the same person. And again, when I say probably, if I look at different hairs on my own head, I have a lot of different colors. They're not all going to look the same. I've had some people that pull out some hairs and some of them have medulla and some of them don't. So that is something about our hairs, is that we do have a lot of varying in our own hair. Even when you pull it directly from your head and get several, they might look a little bit different, each one. So different hairs from one location on a person can vary. That's what I just said. So different hairs on the same location as pulling on my head can vary. So because of this, because of these inconsistencies with our own hair, within each body region, 50 hairs are usually collected from a suspect's head. So if you have a suspect, I'm going to compare his hair to a crime scene. We have to call him in and collect his hair to compare it. And generally they take 50 hairs because hairs look different. So we want to look at a bunch of samples from his hair to get like an average of what his hair usually looks like. Typically 25 hairs are collected from the pubic region. Don't think about it. But that happens. So about 50 from the head or 25 from the pubic region. If we have to take hairs from other parts of the body, you would, but those are just the two most common places. Not that that's a nice thing to think about, but I mean, obviously hair from our head falls out all the time. A lot of the cases deal with sexual assault. So pubic hairs could be a part of the things we have to look at as well. The recommended method for collecting head hairs is to start by the person from whom is being collected, to just bend over a large sheet of paper and just kind of like shake out their hair and see how much will fall out without doing anything. Just get the hairs will fall out, because again, we lose about 100 a day from our head. So they should be able to get some, just trying to get the ones that are already loose to fall out. If they can't get to 50, then you pluck whatever they can't get to. So no cutting the hair. They literally pluck it out. I think this will be our last slide, right? Yes. So hair from different parts of the body. Hair varies from region to region. So 6 types of hair in our body: head hair, eyebrows and eyelashes, beard and mustache, underarm hair. Auxiliary body hair is just like your whole body, like arm hair, leg hair, that kind of stuff. And then your pubic hair. So each hair has its own shape and characteristics to it. Hair from the head and pubic region are the most common hairs found at crime scenes, because that's just the reality of the kind of crimes that you're going to be looking at. And then hair from other animals are frequently found. Pets, farm animals, fur from clothing, that kind of stuff is also found really often. So if you're trying to do hair analysis, you're going to be, you need to be really clear, and you have to be very knowledgeable about what each of these things look at. So if you see it on a slide, you're like, oh, that's a head hair, that's an underarm hair, that's a dog hair, that's not even human, that kind of thing. All right. So that's where we'll stop for today. Get my face out of the way.